The narrative presents a fictional geopolitical and military crisis that unfolds on January 25, 2026, depicting a rapid escalation from symbolic confrontation to full-spectrum military engagement between Iran and the United States. The scenario is constructed as a study in strategic signaling, escalation dynamics, deterrence failure, and asymmetric response capability. Through a tightly compressed timeline, the account explores how propaganda, perception management, and military doctrine interact under conditions of high tension. The central geographic and political stage is Tehran, while the principal military asset at risk is the American aircraft carrier USS Abraham Lincoln. The narrative integrates symbolic communication, operational planning, tactical combat, and retaliatory doctrine into a single causal chain, presenting a cautionary model of escalation driven by reputational pressures. The scenario begins with an act of visual propaganda, the unveiling of a massive billboard in central Tehran depicting the destruction of a U.S. aircraft carrier. The imagery portrays a broken and burning vessel, bodies in surrounding waters, and the Iranian flag raised above the wreckage. The accompanying text, rendered in both English and Persian, warns that those who sow wind will reap a whirlwind. This message functions simultaneously as deterrent signaling, psychological warfare, and political theater. Its intended audiences are multiple: domestic constituents, regional observers, and the United States itself. From an academic perspective, the billboard operates as a performative threat. It is not merely rhetorical but anticipatory, depicting a specific outcome that has not yet occurred. The narrative frames this as an example of reputational commitment. By publicly predicting a military outcome, Iranian leadership binds its credibility to future action. The propaganda thus transforms from symbolic messaging into a strategic constraint. Once disseminated globally, through social media amplification and international news coverage by organizations such as CNN, BBC, and Al Jazeera, the message acquires international visibility and interpretive weight. The United States responds publicly with restraint, treating the display as propaganda rather than a casus belli. However, internal military interpretation differs. Within the narrative, American leadership perceives a billboard as a potential indicator of intent rather than mere rhetoric. This divergence between public messaging and private assessment reflects a classic feature of strategic communication. States often maintain rhetorical calm while preparing operational contingencies. At the operational level, the narrative situates the American Carrier Strike Group as a central instrument of regional power projection. The carrier and its escorts represent not only military capability, but also the principle of freedom of navigation and maritime presence. The strike group's continued operation in contested waters signals deterrence by presence, a doctrine asserting that sustained forward deployment prevents adversary coercion. The narrative emphasizes the layered architecture of the carrier strike group. It includes multiple defensive rings, early warning systems, long-range interceptors, fighter aircraft patrols, electronic warfare capabilities, and close-range defensive weapons. This layered defense is presented not merely as technology but as doctrine, an integrated system designed to counter saturation attacks. The fleet's posture at the beginning of the scenario is one of routine readiness, not active hostility, underscoring the narrative's emphasis on provocation originating from symbolic escalation rather than immediate military necessity. The transition from symbolic confrontation to military action occurs within Iranian command structures. The narrative frames this decision as driven by reputational dynamics rather than purely strategic calculation. Having publicly demonstrated an image of American defeat, Iranian leadership perceives inaction as a loss of credibility. The billboard thus functions as a self-imposed commitment device. Strategic choice becomes constrained by prior signaling. From an academic standpoint, this reflects a known phenomenon in international relations. Leaders may escalate to maintain credibility when symbolic commitments raise audience costs. The narrative portrays internal debate, with some voices warning that attacking a U.S. carrier would invite full-scale conflict. Nevertheless, the leadership ultimately authorizes a limited but demonstrative strike designed to validate propaganda without triggering total war. This miscalculation becomes central to the story's interpretive arc. The planned Iranian operation is depicted as a coordinated multi-domain strike intended to overwhelm defensive systems through saturation. The attack combines shore-based anti-ship missiles, strike aircraft equipped with additional missiles, and low-altitude attack helicopters approaching from dispersed positions. The strategy relies on simultaneity and volume, seeking to stress defensive response capacity and create multiple vectors of threat. In military theory, such an approach reflects an attempt at denial through saturation. Rather than matching the adversary symmetrically, the attacking force seeks to exploit numerical concentration and coordination. The narrative emphasizes a concept of convergence, multiple platforms launching from separate locations to compress defensive reaction time. The objective is both tactical destruction and symbolic confirmation of the earlier propaganda image. The American response begins before weapons are launched. Space-based surveillance detects preparatory activity, illustrating the role of intelligence in modern naval warfare. Heightened alert status follows, with additional fighter patrols and weapons readiness. This stage illustrates the principle of anticipatory defense, preparation in response to indicators rather than confirmed attack. When the assault begins, the narrative highlights rapid detection through advanced radar systems, automated alerts, centralized command coordination, and distributed defensive engagement demonstrate a network-centric warfare model. Defensive response is portrayed as sequential layering, long-range interception, mid-range missile engagement, air superiority operations, and close-range point defense. The core combat sequence describes a high-intensity but brief defensive battle. Long-range interceptors engage incoming missiles at distance, reducing threat density before closer engagement. Fighter aircraft intercept attacking bombers, preventing effective missile release. Attack helicopters approaching at low altitude are intercepted by defending aircraft, illustrating multi-domain engagement across air and sea. The narrative frames the defense as technologically decisive. Interceptors destroy incoming threats in stages, while electronic warfare and decoy systems disrupt targeting. The engagement culminates in close-range defensive fire, neutralizing the final missile before impact. The outcome is portrayed as a complete defensive success. No damage, no casualties, and total neutralization of attacking forces. The narrative's central thematic shift occurs when defensive success transitions immediately into overwhelming retaliation. The American response targets not only attacking units, but the broader infrastructure enabling them. Missile batteries, air bases, naval installations, command centers, radar networks, and logistical support facilities are struck simultaneously. Electronic warfare disables defensive sensors, while precision weapons eliminate fixed targets. This retaliatory strategy reflects a doctrine of escalation dominance, demonstrating the capacity to impose costs far exceeding the initial attack. The response is rapid, comprehensive, and geographically distributed. By striking command, production, and support infrastructure, the operation aims to eliminate future threat capability rather than merely punish past action. Beyond military targets, the narrative includes destruction of propaganda infrastructure associated with the original billboard campaign. This element underscores the story's thematic focus on symbolic confrontation. The counterstrike is not only physical but narrative. The initial symbolic message is reversed through operational reality. The scenario thus depicts a cycle of symbolic escalation, followed by material correction. Propaganda predicts destruction. Military response redefines meaning. The narrative's rhetorical structure repeatedly contrasts representation with outcome. A brief ground operation by American forces serves a narrative function of evidentiary confirmation. Intelligence collected from targeted installations allegedly links the attack directly to the earlier propaganda initiative. This element reinforces a causal chain from symbolic messaging to military action. In analytical terms, it represents post-strike battle damage assessment and intelligence exploitation. One of the narrative's defining features is temporal compression. The entire sequence, from initial missile launch to completion of counterstrike, occurs within approximately 30 minutes. This compression emphasizes the speed of modern warfare and the decisive importance of readiness. Strategic signaling unfolds over hours, but operational consequences materialize within minutes. High operational tempo is presented as both capability and message. Speed itself becomes a form of dominance, demonstrating capacity to observe, decide, and act faster than the adversary. The narrative portrays extreme asymmetry in outcomes, complete survival of one side and catastrophic losses for the other. This asymmetry functions rhetorically as deterrence messaging. The story suggests that attempt to challenge superior force result not in parity, but in overwhelming reversal. Such portrayal aligns with classical deterrence logic, demonstrating both defensive invulnerability and retaliatory certainty. By combining perfect defense with disproportionate response, the narrative constructs a model of absolute escalation control. In its concluding sections, the narrative shifts from description to interpretation. It frames the entire event as a lesson about the relationship between rhetoric and capability. The billboard that initially symbolized American defeat becomes, in retrospect, a symbol of Iranian miscalculation. Propaganda is depicted as a performative act that creates expectations and constrains policy choices. When those expectations exceed operational capacity, symbolic escalation produces strategic disaster. The repeated motif of sowing wind and reaping whirlwind is reinterpreted as a universal warning about escalation dynamics. Threats, once public, generate pressure for action. Action, when miscalculated, invites disproportionate response. Thus, the narrative presents a deterministic chain linking symbolic commitment to material outcome. From an academic standpoint, the scenario illustrates several theoretical concepts. First, it demonstrates audience cost theory. Leaders escalate to maintain credibility after public commitments. Second, it illustrates escalation ladders, showing rapid movement from symbolic confrontation to military engagement. Third, it portrays deterrence failure resulting from misperception of adversary capability. Fourth, it emphasizes network-centric warfare, where integrated systems enable rapid defensive coordination. Fifth, it highlights escalation dominance, where one actor retains control across all levels of conflict intensity. The narrative is structured as a cautionary parable rather than a neutral operational account. It employs repetition, contrast, and symbolic inversion. The initial image of destruction becomes a reverse prophecy. The story's logic is moral as much as strategic. Those who threaten without capability invite their own downfall. By combining technical military description with symbolic framing, the narrative seeks to demonstrate the limits of performative power when confronted by operational superiority. The closing emphasis on transformation, from symbolic threat to material consequence, reinforces the story's didactic intent. The fictional events of January 25, 2026, depict a rapid progression from propaganda display to military confrontation, culminating in decisive asymmetry of outcome. The scenario frames symbolic messaging as a catalyst for escalation, portrays layered defense and rapid retaliation as instrument of dominance, and interprets the confrontation as a lesson in the risks of reputational commitment. The aircraft carrier initially depicted as destroyed continues operations, while the actor that issued the threat experiences systemic military loss. In analytical terms, the narrative presents a model of escalation driven by credibility pressures, resolved through technological superiority and rapid retaliatory doctrine. It concludes by asserting that symbolic threats become dangerous when they create obligations that cannot be fulfilled, transforming communication into conflict.